One of the things that I look at when I'm working with a group or when I'm working with an individual is coachability. One of the best top executive coaches, and I'm going to go Marshall Goldsmith, he talks about the reason I'm a good coach is because I'm really good at finding the coachee, but I refer to it as coachability. So is where are they in terms of awareness? Where are they in terms of interest? Coachability, it's working with individuals to define what it is they're trying to achieve. And in that process, there's an understanding of awareness.
Welcome to the Mindform Podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. Welcome to another episode of the Mindform Podcast, an extension of the Mindform collective and training platform. This podcast is similarly a space dedicated to exploring and altering psychological landscapes together. In each of these weekly episodes, I will speak with a new guest, generally members of Mindform, to extract wisdom, refine ideas, and collaborate on the game of architecting our minds. So this week's guest is Michael Verhey. Have I said that right, by the way? Verhey?
Yeah, that's very good. Michael Verhey,
sweet.
Sure.
Okay, based in Toronto, Canada, Michael is a newer member of Mindform, but he's certainly not new to the project of psychotecture. He is a long-time executive coach and a serious practicing secular Buddhist. He also has interest and knowledge in integral theory and relational frame theory, which is a particular favorite of mine, a bit more fringe people who understand that theory well. And it's the model behind ACT therapy, which some of you might have heard of. On Mindform, he brings value to our conversations with integral perspectives and expertise from his work. So yeah, I'm just excited to uncover more about how these different fields of wisdom uniquely intersect in the person of Michael and his unique wisdom. Without further ado, welcome to the Mindform Podcast, Michael.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really quite excited about it.
Awesome. So yeah, how are you today? What are your sort of top 3 feelings that have been on top for you last day or so?
Yeah, no, I think the aspiration, especially in front of a webcam or in front of a camera, is to be present. So what's happening right now is it's like what is it that we're going to talk about? And we sort of had a discussion or an email back and forth in terms of here's some questions that are going to come up and here's some comments that are going to happen, and hopefully we'll have some lively conversation that brings out hopefully some insights.
Curiosity, maybe excitement a little bit. That's how I'm feeling anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I think that touches on it. I think it's about curiosity and impact is probably the interest that I've got.
Great. Awesome. Well, I just want to start with, I guess, getting a bit of a picture of the context of you and the framework within which you like to exercise and explore a lot of the ideas we're going to talk about on here. So you're an executive coach, and you just referred to impact as well. Mm-hmm. I guess that's a part of the purpose of that work. So what is that in as far as that exists in your life?
Okay, so background is worked in a number of different areas. From a career stream that brought me into executive coaching. Started out as a diagnostic sales specialist for a biomedical company. Couldn't sell. They then made me a manager. I then ended up working in a number of different situations where it was about leading and influencing people in a sales context and in a leadership context. And I found that there was real value and excitement on my part to really talk to leaders in a way that, as a foundation, helping them to accelerate insight to performance. So how do they go from generating some ideas and understandings of what is really going on in their desired outcomes, and how do you make that happen for them? Mm-hmm. So executive coaching, boy, there are just a lot of different terms for coaching, but executive coaching is working with leaders in a way that helps them create and sustain long-lasting results. And there's a number of very, they can be very complex processes for that, but there's some perspectives, there's a rapport, getting into a relationship with the leader so that you can, A, understand what kind of outcomes they're looking for, and B, help them move in that direction.
Awesome. And so you do that both in sort of like a one-to-one capacity, and also you might do presentations or group things.
Yeah, well, I've done it in a number of different ways. I just got off a project where I was working with in Canada, we call it a Financial Post 500 or Fortune 500, or, I tend to work with corporations and working with them and leadership development, really looking at how do we address the issues of coming of AI, how do we address the issues of engaging employees in a context of remote working, which was a huge aspect in Canada and around the world, of course, and working actually in a way that was developing leadership skills, developing leadership capabilities and competencies, as well as coaching those. Now, also working not just one-on-one, which are with leaders of leaders or leaders, but also in a team context. So working with an intact department, as well as something that's emerging in the area of peer coaching, which is groups getting together, being facilitated by a coach, but enabling them to get greater degrees of perspective and help them to understand what are some areas that they could benefit from others.
Right. So that would be like you create prompts and you facilitate and support people to actually sort of educate and support each other with their own insights.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially in the context of remote work, I'm finding it fascinating, for example, in coaching, that there are a number of offerings out there on the internet and in organizations where they go, look, you don't have to talk to people in any kind of in-depth way. It's just turn on your webcam. You're going to be in a space. You might share the odd comment, but it's basically you working on your issues while the other person works on their issues. And you just set a time for that.
Yeah. It's like Focus Mate, right? Yeah, it's very helpful for me. I think it's like it seems to be, and maybe the whole COVID drama is part of why that's the case. But there seems to be a growing or renewed appreciation for just the inherent value of the presence of other people in being able to get work done or being able to improve the quality of work. Like, it's really not a top-down matter of this is the outcome and this is the accountability person, and then your job is to perform on that. Actually, so much value, so much of the value and the growth comes from what's this network of relationships, what's the culture like there, how do we feed back off of each other, how do our different perspectives and skills come and integrate. So I use FocusMate, which is just an app where you set a work time. And are you familiar with it?
Right. Not familiar with that as a name. There's a number of other areas here in North America where we're seeing that. The one thing that I think is important, and the one that I've learned, I've been in executive coaching for almost 20 years, and a lot of the leaders will say, and individuals will say, I don't want coaching. I just want to get from here where I am to there, which is where I want to go. And now I believe if you talk 20 years ago, it'd be like, coaching is something that really isn't necessarily sought after, to now it'd be useful to have a coach to accelerate that. I think because of sort of folks, maybe again in a remote context, they're feeling a little isolated, and they're recognizing that there's so much information. We only have so much bandwidth, that it's really critical that we have other people's perspectives. And actually, that's one of the reasons that I'm kind of a real avid. I have a very strong interest in Mindform, because I think that whole piece about connecting with others, in a like-minded way, or at least like-minded in a way that fosters perspective, questions. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Insight. I think that they're
Oh
really
yeah,
important.
absolutely. I think it seems like really there's a and probably COVID's a part of it, but there's more going on there. Over the last however many years, we've built our own world out of the more obvious, the more sort of outcome oriented stuff, and we've not noticed the subtle but very real reality of the need for other people, the need for sharing insights, the need for back and forth to get things done. And I think there's a lot, and Mindform's a great expression of this. There's a growing awareness now that we've created a system lacking in places lacking in that kind of social responsiveness, where everyone's just behind their own screen doing their own work in their own cubicle, whatever.
Right.
I think that it seems to me, and I hear it a lot from like the generation even below me, that there's just a lot of yearning for just being in space with other people. There's a renewed appreciation. People realize what they lack when they don't have that community, when they don't have that
Yeah.
feedback. So is that
Yeah. Well,
go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to say, when we,
you
do I
go.
go? Okay. I was just going to say that, in terms of the number of things that you mentioned in the introduction and some of the areas that I'm interested in, one of the commonalities when I thought about it and thinking about today's session or today's discussion was it's all about awareness, approach, and action. So from a leadership perspective and a coach, one of the things that one can at least try to get a sense of when we're working together is where is the level of awareness or presence? What is the approach? And what will I do that will have impact? And so awareness, approach, and action. And that's where that's where relational frame theory, that's where Buddhism, and that's where a lot of the philosophies really have incredible pointers. And that's been my experience in terms of how it all gets together. It's about how does it fall into each of them. They're obviously large buckets, but when you talk about awareness, the whole approach from a Buddhist perspective, a secular Buddhist perspective, is how do I take this incredible volume of wisdom and bring it into today's environment, not getting caught up in the 10,000 arms or the many things that are the many references that are culturally driven. How do we make it relevant here? And likewise with ACT, how do I look at that in terms of developing awareness? How do I look at that in terms of adjusting my approach? And how do I look about that in terms of value-driven action?
Well, that's quite interesting, because I was one of the things I was quite curious about, just with your, I suppose, diverse work and diverse interests, is how your coaching is enhanced, altered, or made unique by your, your work on Buddhism and your interest in integral theory and ACT therapy and all of that. But what I'm seeing now is there's a little bit of the inverse there, where in fact your capacity to get the most or sort of extract the really practical value out of Buddhism or out of ACT therapy comes from the fact that you are trying to utilize those tools in a context where it's about where am I going, and how do we close that gap, right? So I think you're right that there's definitely a lot of in these worldviews, there's so much there that's very interesting and very exciting, but there's a lot of value in finding, okay, well, what am I actually trying to do now, and what are the pieces of this that are going to achieve that for me?
Yeah, exactly. So, and so I do play in a lot of the fields, but for example, and I think I've even had discussions on Mindform about that, where you can say something like coaching and it evokes a whole lot of different ideas. But if we tie it into integral theory model, and for people who haven't been exposed to integral, it can, I remember sharing it with a good friend, one of the main books, and sharing integral. This one was actually talked about integral vision, and and we were good friends and all the rest. And he basically, at the end of it, after he'd reviewed the book, and he went, "Do you do this stuff on a regular basis? Like, are you really into this stuff?" It can be very complex, but what I like about Integral, and where I think it informs all the other things, the basic model says, look, there are two axes that we're concerned with. One is individual, the other is collective. And there's another one that we need to look at in terms of subjective, what's going on inside of me, and objective, what's going on out there. So inside, outside is single or individual and collective. And once you start to look at that, you can see that everybody has their preferences. Some people, for example, and this is where I don't want to get too technical for sure, but there's individual, what goes on inside of my head, the arena of psychology. There's external, the objectives, the outside, external, individual situation, culture, and systems. And people have their preferences. Engineers tend to be very interested in systems in a broad sense. Of course, there are individuals who are engineers who are very, very spiritual, very, very, much into the upper left quadrant. The issue with it, though, is it expands our capability of defining reality, of defining our experience, and it gets us outside of that. So for example, even though I was involved with and have been involved with an area, it's called Shambhala, but it's Tibetan Buddhism for many, many years. It's a pointer to our experience, and how do we deal with that experience in a way that is aligned with where we want to go and where we want to achieve outcomes. Did that sound a little
I'm
bit
keeping up. I'm
too
keeping
much
up,
from the
but we'll
pulpit?
see. I don't know.
Oh, no, I'm just talking about from the pulpit. I have a tendency
No, that's
to get
great. I mean, I'm here to
back to myself.
I'm here to learn from you and listen to you, and a lot of the fun for this of me as well is like, the guests have unique and interesting perspective, and it's fun for me to I guess help to, like, you guys will articulate your wisdom, your ideas, and then I like to go, okay, but here's the bit that I quite don't understand, or here's the gap, and then we get to paint a bigger picture of that, and maybe find something unique. And that I just doodled this while you were talking. This is the quadrants, right?
Yeah.
I missed what that one
Yeah,
would
exactly.
be called,
That's
but
very good. No, that's a quadrants. They call it the quadrants.
Cool.
So the quadrant model is, there are a number of other development.
Integral is very rich. I mean, after we talked a previous time, I'm getting some email chain now from something I signed up for, just like the basics, of building up theory, because I'm very interested in it, and
they do have a very good program for that.
Fantastic.
Good. And by the way, what's really critical with that, and I think with that particular model, is they've defined wicked problems. When they say that integral will help with dealing with wicked problems. Wicked problems are, simple things like, the way we're organizing countries and trade, climate change.
The easy stuff.
Artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence. When artificial intelligence becomes a self-developed agency, these are things that are the key is, in the old days, if you would, I probably shouldn't use that term, but in the old days, a lot of problem solving was fairly linear. Hey, we do this, and then and there's our outcome. It is now what happens is if you change this in culture, in climate change, that has an impact here in terms of political systems, which has an impact here in terms of spiritual approach. So it's dealing with getting a perspective of that. And the technologies that I'm interested in are really variations of the 3 A's: awareness, approach, and action.
Yeah. And what I see the value of integral is, I mean, just related to what you were just saying, like, it really seems like the problems that we're facing today are just more complex, right? Where it's like, sort of the basic level of the basic approach that most people take to solving problems could be brought to the problems we were trying to solve 50 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever. But today there's such a high level of systems thinking and integral understanding, and bringing all these different knowledges and even different fields of understanding together, just to be able to
Right.
understand some of the problems that we're trying to solve today, which is crazy. But that's to me how I understand the value of integral. It's that it just creates frameworks, right? So you're trying to say you're at the awareness, what was it, awareness, approach, action.
Awareness, approach, and
There's
action.
so much to I guess where I apply it, like in the context of quadrants, for example, is I see my problem, I see my situation, and integral, it doesn't help me so much to decide which approach, but it helps me even understand where to start with this. Like, okay, this is an option of how I could analyze this problem, or this is an option of how I could analyze a problem.
Right.
And I can look at it. It just gives me the language to look at the problem through different lenses, through different perspectives, to really, to help me build a map of how to navigate, because we don't normally have the ability to ask those questions or know where to start when we're trying to solve really complex problems. And I'm sure even in the context of your executive coaching work, I mean, it's a complicated business. Relationships are complicated.
Absolutely.
The businesses might be dealing with complicated problems. Like, you need to have something where it's like, okay, where do I even start? Like, where do I start to understand what this problem is? Do I look at it in terms of culture? Do I look at it in terms of systems?
Oh, no question. I mean, I've encountered that many times working with organizations where they have a particular preference, and that is, it's culture eats strategy. There's all kinds of cliches like that. But the issue is, if they're very driven by culture, are they taking into account the systems that are either supporting or causing obstacles to that? Are they looking at what actually has to happen in terms of behaviors? You have some people that are going, no, just adjust your mindset, man. It's just get your mindset on the right way and everything is fine. And that's interesting. I mean, I think philosophical, psychological types really, that's their comfort zone. But it's like, but let's take a look at some of the other arenas. And a metaphor that they use quite often, and I think I've mentioned it once before, and that is, you're in a house. There are 4 windows in each wall. And is the one window that you're looking out, whatever it is, whether that's subjective or objective or systems or culture, is that the only? No, actually, there's some value in taking a look out of all four windows. And maybe, then you add a Buddhist perspective, which is like, what about duality and non-duality? And how do we then layer that on top so that we get a view from our perspective? And a lot of times when I see people talking at cross purposes, they're talking about their preference. So somebody will say, you want to start getting things done? Get up at 5:30 every morning, and that's what you do. That's a great external upper right quadrant. And others are saying, no, it's all about internally. It's how you think about it and what you think about. Which one is true? Yeah. Actually, they're all true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
there's some value in understanding.
So you would find in this work, when you're again, it's moving from, and I'm really curious about this because it's a big, I guess, it's the problem I'm trying to solve, or it's the ambition I'm striving for in my life at the moment. It's a really core part of my journey right now.
What are you trying to create?
It's this movement from inside.
As opposed to the problem.
Right. That's a great way to put it. That's right. I was trying to, well, it's not necessarily a problem. It's just where I'm at. But what am I trying to create? So it's moving from insight to outcome. That's really a big thing for me, because I'm big on the insights. I really enjoy that. But I certainly, what's my process? What's my system? Whatever, for like translating that into outcomes. And I can see the value in just in these different aspects. And I wonder, in your work, do you find that it usually is that the gap is maybe people are doing everything right from the perspectives that they consider the problem at, but they actually just haven't even thought about systems. And so it's not that they're wrong, it's just that they're missing this angle. Is that often what it is?
Yeah, because I think one of the things is I've had a lot of, I'm coming from an operational experience. So I've been general manager for 3 of some, title president or general manager of 3 different companies. There is a tendency to get into what I call adviceism. And that is just I've got a really good advice. And Coaching is not
Mm.
about that. As a matter of fact, there's a relatively well-known executive coach who talks about taming the advice monster, because it's really, if you will, working with anyone. Because don't forget, we're talking about your experience is your experience. You get symbols out of your mind and communicate that. But the issue is it's your experience. That isn't really all that easily communicated. But it's really important to listen people into their own wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of going, here's the greatest thing, and we have a lot of that in the internet. If you look up leadership, I'm sure you'll get more than 1 million references. And interestingly, they might have a preference for, this is the systems approach. This is the interior subjective approach. This is the just do these behaviors. This is the manage your culture. Find out what's going on with that. And so it's really an important piece to ask the right questions. And as a coach or somebody who is engaging in a coaching kind of a relationship, it's really helpful to ask, questions that get them to go, I hadn't thought of that. In the context of where do we want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and Ryan, just in the listening right now in the comments says, thinks that's a fantastic phrase, listening people into their own wisdom, and I completely agree. And it's also like a really interesting and fun and exciting thing to do, and it's a curious phenomena as well, that it's almost like we have this knowledge that either it's secret to us, or it's maybe it exists in potential, or it's inevitable, or it's incompletely formed. But what we need is not necessarily to be given ideas or to be given new information, but just to kind of figure out what we already know, and the value of conversation and feedback and the right questions and doing that is really powerful. But to me, it speaks to something really interesting about like what is wisdom, that you can contain it and no one else, maybe even, but you don't even know that you have that wisdom. You need that social feedback to extract it or uncover it or refine it. That's profound to me.
Yeah, you need to create a space to do that. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned, often the hard way, because in our interest sometimes in communicating, we just use words that everybody knows what that word means.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were talking about kia ora or.
Right? Kia ora.
So that's a greeting.
Ora. Yeah.
Ora, sorry. Ora. Yeah. And then I looked at some of the other aspects. It's like, how's it going, eh? I mean, the issue is that there is a context. That's a Canadian.
Yes, I know.
Yeah. Take off, eh? So the issue is, how does, when we're talking, your experience base is very different than mine. And a lot of the formative stuff that you learned growing up in terms of culture, in terms of other aspects, are going to be different than mine. Now, we have some things that we are common on, but unless we actually set a frame, set a space for us to talk about that in a way that's meaningful, and I found personally that it's really hard to start off with what's going on internally. It's like, so where are you? Where do you want to go? Where do we want to go? Actually, that's another thing that I think has been, I think in terms of what's been successful for me, is really understanding and working at framing the me to we change in identity. So, for example, you and I are having a conversation, and we're really looking at how do we explore the topic of how does some of this experience connect to Mindform? How does it connect to other aspects that are meaningful to us? It's when we, this is probably a Wilburism. It's when we enter into the intersubjective space. So it's like your head, my head. We're having three conversations. Yeah. What's going on in your head? What's going on in my head? What's going on in our conversation that's being captured, by the way. But I think that that is really an important piece before we get started, because people are coming from a different direction.
Oh, yeah. It's just, yeah. And it blows my mind. I love that idea of the three conversations. And I think of it as three people as well. I mean, so much of what defines you as your unique self, it's the values that, like, you're a pattern of thought and processing information to a large degree. I mean, that's a big part of what makes you are, the unique pattern that you are, and it comes with it's your unique values, your unique experiences, your unique way of breaking down things, all of that, your unique way of approaching problems. And so I'm unique in that way, you're unique in that way, but then there's whatever we overlap on that exists in the space between us, right? And that's dependent on context and other things too, but that has its own set of values, that has its own way of breaking down problems, that has its own perspective and all of that. And so it's almost like there's a third person in that space that really
Right.
only exists when we're in conversation. I really love thinking about that in the context of my relationships, because that's what I've really come to find as someone who I have relationships, I guess, with really different people. I've moved between lots of kinds of social circles in my life, and I see that something when I'm in relationship with, say, you and a lot of people on Mindform, there's a certain part of me that exists more in that space, and there's kind of a whole
Right.
personhood that is unique to that relational context that I get to partake in. And then in other relationships, there's a completely different person that's deeply tied to me that gets to exist. Whoops, banging my microphone there. That gets to exist in that context, but not any other. And so part of what that's taught for me is the deep value and the deep importance of relating with different kinds of people and relating in different contexts, and keeping that up, because you really don't know what kind of knowledges and values and so maybe even like hidden selves are available or potentially available to you that are not being allowed to exist, or have value extracted from them simply because you're always hanging out with the same people or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that, at a very fundamental philosophical state, if you will, that there's sort of a polarity of wholeness and part.
Mhm.
So, wholeness, if it's all, that's kind of, and I'll use another probably antiquated reference.
It's definitely integral.
Although I
That's
think
integral, guaranteed.
yeah, yeah. But this integrate, it's like the Borg. It's like just everybody into the collective. This is what, that's the wholeness. This is what everything is. However, at the same time, there's, if we're looking, it is a duality piece. It's like we connect between wholeness and part. So here's my experience. Here's our experience. How do we make it relevant? How do we make it relevant in a way that is useful for you, that generates insight, that generates potentially impact? And that's actually what I think, I think of as coaching. I mean, it's really helping people to make the connection on so many levels.
Yeah. So with coaching, what is okay? So you've been doing this for a while, and it seems like your focus has been for a while this movement, right? Insight to outcome. How do we translate that? Like, how do we we start with having a conversation, an organic conversation, building connection, and okay, outcome, the insights. And then there's what approach are we going to take to deal with these? And then how do we get there, right? How do we make something out of that? And that's very interesting to me. And I'm particularly curious, what is really like the core for you, like the leverage points? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of variation there, but what are the leverage points for you in terms of moving from insight to outcome? What are the things, what stops people? Maybe that would be my question. What really stops people from that?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's an excellent question, Frank. I think, one of the things that I look at when I'm working with a group or when I'm working with an individual is coachability.
Yeah.
So, it's really, I mean, actually one of the best top, executive coaches in terms of writings, and I'm going to go Marshall Goldsmith. He talks about the reason I'm a good coach is because I'm really good at finding the coachees. So it's actually, but I refer to it as coachability. So is where are they in terms of awareness? Where are they in terms of interest? So there's some people that are going, I just want to get this fixed. And then that could be a skill building kind of an approach, and it may not necessarily be that focused. So coachability, and then I think it's working with individuals to define what it is they're trying to achieve, and in that process, there's an understanding of awareness.
So
Are they?
is there
Pardon me?
often a people are coming into coaching, whether I don't know whether it's mandated by the system they're a part of or whether it's their own interest, whatever, but people are coming into this context because there's something that they're trying to get to and they're not getting there,
Right.
they want support with that. But are you saying that often actually a major barrier there is that people don't really know what it is they're trying to achieve?
Exactly. They don't know. And in some cases, they don't know. I mean, the thing is, you're talking about a distinction or a difference between a coach and a therapist. So the coach is generally working with high functioning leaders, and they're future focused. Don't really want to go into the background necessarily, and if that comes up, then that's an opportunity to make a referral to somebody who's more qualified for dealing with those kinds of issues. And then I think it's really about working together. It's not a simple it's not sort of cut and dried. What do you want to achieve? There's usually it really falls into there's usually a problem or an opportunity. The problem is that I'm just not getting engagement. I've been put in charge of a remote group of 80 people. I don't know how to deal with that. Or there's there's something that's a new opportunity. I'm a new leader.
Right.
I've been a leader, but now I'm a leader of leaders. What's the difference with that? How do I deal with that?
Right.
And so some of it is, it's really, for me, it's really about what's the business experience going into that. So, but I think anybody with a good set of mental models, if you will, they can go in and they can actually work in coaching. It's just how deep do you want to go and what is it you want to achieve?
So with obstacles and problems, I can see in both of those, if those are often triggers for coaching, I can see both of those, the real value in going through the process, helping people define where they're going, right? Because solving a problem, you're not really solving a problem until you understand it in terms of like, why don't I like this? I mean, if you want to move, you want to know where you're going, right? Not just what you're trying to get away from.
Right.
I think oftentimes we end up, especially when we don't know exactly where we're going, we're just constantly solving problems. And because we're not understanding them in relation to, I don't like this because it's not where I'm going and I need to move away from it in the direction of where I'm going. It's just constantly, I don't like this. Now I don't like this. Now I don't like this. Now I don't like this. But there's no net movement towards the one thing that you really do like or do want. And then with opportunities, it's the same, right? An opportunity it might seem like, I'm in this new managerial position, or we've got this merger coming up, or whatever, corporate stuff is going on. And obviously there's personal versions of that too. And you think, okay, this is happening and I want to do it well. Okay, but you need to know what well is, because an opportunity is really just a set of resources that you're utilizing to achieve what you want to achieve. And if you don't know what that is, you're not going to take advantage of those resources.
Yeah, there's a frame though that's really important to use, and that is that you want to help the individual help them define where they go. And you're not solving any problems for them. It goes back to the one that I guess triggered Ryan a little bit, is like, it is about listening them into their own wisdom. It is about, and it's also about setting a frame where we're talking about, there's going to be, in terms of this problem or this issue or this opportunity, there's some kind of assessment. There's some kind of, where are you? Where are you in terms of the situation? And that's where Integral helps to do that. Then there's some coaching that goes into asking the right kinds of questions. Then there's some tracking. It's like, this, I know it is kind of old fashioned, but if you read some of the things, the books and the tomes on habits and habit building, you got to track it. I mean, if you're going to be looking for a change in behavior / mindset / any of the other stuff, you need to track that. You need to adjust, and then you need to follow up. And so it's like anything else. I can tell you, I've been in this situation before, and then I go into my advice monster and say, here's how you do it. This is how you fix it. And then they go, I tried it, and Mike was all wet. He didn't have the right answer anyway. That isn't going to work. It's really going to be, how am I going to help you in a way that accelerates your movement, your development? Because what happens is, I don't coach for long when I'm working with executives or leaders. I don't coach for, let's get into a 2-year mentor kind of relationship, even though I do have gray hair. The issue is, no, it's not that. It's actually, we'll work on something, and if you want to work on something else afterwards, then we'll open another agreement around that. But my focus and my interest is, how do we generalize that experience, the experience of you moving the needle, and how do you take that to other areas? And that's where I think we start getting into sort of circular ascending technologies like ACT and relational frame theory, and now even Stephen Hayes is talking about process-based therapy now. So it's really identifying, what are the kickers, what are the things that are really important to you? Because I could talk about in terms of ACT again. I could talk about diffusion until the cows come home, or values-driven action, or whatever you want to talk about. But the issue is, if it's not hot for you, then it's just me, pontificating about some mental model that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's making me think about the 4 quadrants. Right, it's like what side is internal? It's like therapy is a lot of this, culture, psychology, and coaching is a lot of systems and what are you going to do and how you, and it seems to be that they're both slowly, in different ways, but both of those fields I see are integrating the other side of that quadrant drawing a bit more. Like, there's obviously a lot of coaching coming up now where it's like, they're saying, you want to get here, you want to achieve this. Well, the way to get there is we need to figure out what's going on in you to break that, and then we go, right? And then with therapy, there's a lot of new stuff coming in where, I know some psychotherapists and that as well, and it seems like some of their best work is that translation of, okay, now that we've really worked on what's going on, what's wrong, what's the support systems you need, how do we systematize that, how do we take action on that? So it's just a great example of the value of coming at it from those different frameworks, and how common it is for a whole field to just get locked into one way of viewing problems.
Absolutely. I use another term, it's called threading the needle, because I think that's the value. If we go back to our AAA model, if we talk about awareness, it's like, where are people? Do they have an understanding? And oftentimes, if you ask questions, so what does that mean culturally? So what does that mean in this context? And then it becomes, so one of my favorite questions, personally and with coaching clients, is, so what's the next right action? What's the next right? What are you going to do differently? Sometimes, in very rare situations, I've got to make an adjustment subjectively. But I worked with a large aerospace, third largest aerospace company in the world at the time, and working with engineers, and they really, in their particular case, they really, really looked at upper right hand quadrant, which were the actions, the objective, and systems. And so it's like, don't give me any of that soft stuff. That soft stuff is really irrelevant. And there was one individual who worked on apologies. He worked on it was tonal differences in wings, and he was working on the effect of particular vibrations in wings. That was his focus. So it was very, very, very much focused on a highly technical, highly specialized area. And so then there were questions about, let's just expand our perspective on it. And then how are we going to adjust our approach? Then how are we going to take action on it? And then going into the coaching process that I just described, assess, track, adjust.
So do you find, because I often see myself playing a role in like collective decision-making processes in communities, whatever, of kind of asking that question, like what's the next right step? Do you find that part of your job is really you're watching the room, you're seeing how people are solving problems, and you're going, oh, this is the quadrant that's missing this, or this is, this is the way of approaching and understanding problems that no one's looking at it from. And so you ask that question, you just throw that question into the room, right? So that people consider that. One way, when you were talking about earlier, that really just an understanding that brought a lot of what you were saying together for me is the wrong quote unquote approach to coaching is someone's coming to you, right, and they're bringing questions, and then you provide the answers. But no, what you want to do is you want to provide the questions, and they provide the answers, right? And that speaks so much to what's actually going on when someone needs help solving a problem. It's actually not that they know exactly where they need to go. They know what's going on, but they're missing a key piece of information, which is how we often understand our own problems. It's actually quite the other thing. They have the wisdom and the capacity to gain that wisdom and integrate that wisdom. They have the understanding. They have their unique expertise. They have what they value, and it's actually what they're missing is how are they framing that? How are they approaching that? How are that? Where are they not putting their attention? Right. I feel like that's a really, really cool part of it. And so that's a way to work with that reality of what problems are, what my barrier is to success. Again, it's not the piece of information I don't know. It's, am I asking the right questions? Am I looking at this in the right way? I need someone who's asking me questions that I'm providing answers to, rather than because I don't know the right questions to ask, right? I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll also, I go back to that whole idea that it's a dynamic process. So it's not like, oh, okay, we're going to talk and, Mike's going to take a look at the quadrants and go, here's a deficit, or here's, definitely leaning in. It's almost like that it's an intuitive process. When I go in, it's, especially when I'm asking questions, it's intuitive. And when I have a sense, there's a sort of Shane Parrish talks about in his book on mental models. The map is not the territory. So it's helpful. I mean, if I'm going to New Zealand, probably not a great idea to bring a map of Toronto to figure out where I'm going. The issue is it's helpful for me to situate and understand where we are and then intuitively move in that direction. So there are some coaches, and I've done some training of coaches where they just, it's all about asking questions. So all they do is ask questions, I've seen people practically kind of go, over the desk, and man, you just, if you ask me another blinking question, I'm going to get really angry. So it is a movement, just like breathing. There's aspiration and there's exhalation. That's a dynamic, and then we need to make some choices around where we're going to move in terms of threading that needle.
A lot of what's been coming up in this is, you mentioned the distinction earlier, sort of the Buddhist distinction, duality, non-duality, right? Like there's a lot of things here where it's so easy and natural to go, oh, so it's this, not this. But actually there's such an advantage to understanding, okay, well, let's metify this non-duality thing. Sometimes that's useful. Is it this or this? But also sometimes you need to say, you need to see, where it's both or neither, or, it's not necessarily, this is the right approach. It's what are the different ways that we can look at this? What are the different tools that we can utilize as it's needed, as it's relevant? And so just in light of Buddhism, I'm obviously, you've said that's a really big part of your passion, and I'm curious, I guess initially you say you're a secular Buddhist. So before I go a bit more into it, what does that mean briefly?
Yeah, I think it's taking what I refer to as the pointers in terms of what are we talking about? What do we mean by bringing mindfulness into everyday life? For example, if you go very, very basically, there's there's shamatha meditation and there's vipassana meditation, or vipassana, however you refer to it. And so one is actually what can be called peaceful abiding, and the other is more of an insight meditation. So it's where you focus on what does this mean, and that's probably not fair to say it that way, but basically there are two different aspects. And Buddhism has evolved. It was, the only thing is that the Buddha never referred to himself as the Buddha. It's an evolving process. If you read some of the elements of, we've seen some changes. The other thing is there's Zen Buddhism, there's Doshin, there's many different types of
I've got
Buddhism.
this book.
So
it's a tome.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's the 8 of this, the 5 of that, and the
exactly.
6 of this, and the 4 of that, and so on. And I think that what I mean by secular is, I think that, and I think I do understand a lot of some of the theories and some of the 8 of this and so on, but I think it's the question that comes to mind, again, my orientation to operationalizing things. So what? So, and actually I've encountered that where meditation has been identified as a very powerful technique, but not for everybody. And as a matter of fact, there are some people that are in an anxiety state that, and actually I've seen research that says as many as 20% actually find meditation not helpful at all. It actually gets them over-focused and gets them ruminating and all the rest. And if meditation, if its context is used in evading or being a distractor mechanism, it can be very unhelpful. So it's really, how do we take some of the, what I refer to as the pointers of Buddhism, and make it so that it's going to enhance our awareness. I do think it's on that part. I think Stoicism, for example, is very much helpful in terms of approach and action. So that was actually, that's where Ryan got me. It's like, are you potentially interested in the intersection? And I'm very definitely interested in that, because I think they're all pointers. Sometimes in people's enthusiasm, it's like, this has the answer.
Yeah.
That is
one of the things. Yeah.
If I just know everything there is about integral, if I know everything there is about fill in the blank, then that's the way it is. And my experience with that is no.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about Mindfulness. And we have those conversations. So we have Buddhists like Lucas, who's like really into Buddhism, and we have the Stoics, or people that's really the framework that they've really just used the whole time, or that they really started in terms of psychotecture, in terms of designing their own minds and solving personal problems and all of that. But it's a space where like these things come together, and what you're able to achieve with that, or what you're able to get a taste of, is that, these are pointers, and slowly you're filling out this image, which is never going to be complete. It's like that Buddhist metaphor Ryan referenced it in the comments, of the elephant, right? Where the blind people are, someone's touching his leg, it's a tree, someone's touching his tail, it's a broom or whatever. But you start to get a really faint picture of what it is that they're all pointing towards, which is too difficult to contain or articulate. And so the pointers are really, really useful, as long as you remember that that's what they are, right? That they're pointers. And so, sometimes it's really useful to look at problems from this perspective, from the Stoic perspective. Sometimes it's really useful to use the tools that Buddhism presents, to solve this problem. And I love it when we can integrate them together, because we've said on Mindform a few times, we've had that conversation of Stoicism and Stoicism and Buddhism seem to be saying like the same thing a lot. Like there's so much overlap there, but at the same time they're really different. I think that difference could be understood in terms of the quadrant, right? Like are we looking at the internal or the external? Are we looking at the subtle and psychological, or the specific and practical, right? Like it's it's just cool that there can be that sameness and that difference, and when you can appreciate that, you get so much more out of each of them.
Absolutely. I mean, fundamentally, I think that any of the practices that we do is about how do we enhance a resourceful state of presence. So the issue is, that's the mission, if you will. And there's a whole, and just about everybody will say that. There's a lot of different paths to get there. But if that's the approach, then because it's going to be your resourceful state of presence is going to be different than potentially than mine. As a matter of fact, again, that's probably going to Wilbur. An enlightened being 2,000 years ago is probably different in terms of their development than an enlightened person who's moving teal turquoise second tier, as they refer to it in integral. It'll be different.
Yeah.
And I think that happens on all kinds of levels. I mean, look, I think that that was me. I could tell I was getting onto the pulpit. But the issue is that the amount of information that we have hitting us as an individual in any of the Western countries, and I'm sure other ones, but it is probably the amount of information that we get in a week is probably more than somebody 2,000 years ago got in a lifetime. And so that's why I believe secular Buddhism is again, it's just one of the pointers. And I think that we're also learning a tremendous amount in Western psychology and philosophy as well.
Yeah, I love thinking about that. I love thinking about how just always being reminded, and it's so easy to forget, but just always being reminded how non-singular, how moving, how context dependent all of these icons we grab onto are, whether it's like a resourceful state or happiness or enlightenment or mastery or whatever. Like, it really does. I agree. I mean, I'd not thought of it before, but I agree with that sentiment, in principle at least, that an enlightened being, 2,000 years ago, someone who, an enlightened being, and the various different things that means to different people. But that's different then to what it is now. And when you said a resourceful state as well, like my resourceful state is different to your resourceful state, certainly, but also my resourceful state in this context is different to my resourceful state in that context. And what you want to master is not the ability to be this particular way, to have these particular, it's the ability to have that, it's that responsiveness, it's that skill you want to be constantly improving and altering and moving in. It has to be mobile. It's that responsiveness to, okay, what's my context? I mean, it's often an unconscious thing, right? Not necessarily this explicit, but what's my context? Who am I relating with? Where am I trying to go? All of that's going to change what the most resourceful approach is, what the best way of thinking is, what the best tools to extract are, the optimal emotional state. Like, none of that is a singular thing.
Absolutely not. I mean, just for the kicks and to make sure that we have a fully rounded discussion, then we could put into overlayer internal family systems, which really says, when it starts going into, what is the self? Is the self that center of equanimity, observer self, and all the others are bit players but have a part to play?
Yeah, it's a useful way of understanding it, right? And that's it.
Very, but it goes to that fundamental I was talking about, which is wholeness in part. Right? And it's not this or that. That's the interesting thing, Nagarjuna, in terms of Buddhism. Around I think it was 1000 AD mark. He was one who brought in and really freaked a lot of Buddhists out around duality. And the issue is that it's neither this nor that.
Yeah.
It is this, exactly. So that logic, his logic was that person's logic, I guess, to be more enlightened, was
that reminds me of, just especially when you use the term logic there, that reminds me of Lucas, our resident Buddhist, in the last Upwelling conversation we had on Mindform, right? He had an interesting contribution at the end. It's like, which I kept thinking about, is or versus and logic. Like at the computational level, that's really distinctly different. I mean, you have basically those
Right.
two forms of logic gates, and they serve really different functions. And if you put the wrong logic gate at the wrong point, then the whole thing's going to be whack. And so having, I guess it speaks to the importance of asking that question: are we coming at this problem with an or an and approach? Are we responding to how these things can both exist, if these things can both exist, how they can come together, those things being approaches to a problem, perspectives on an issue, or
Yep.
are we, or is this unquestioned assumption that it has to be one or the other? And that I can
Yeah.
see that as being deeply impactful for our actual capacity to solve and understand problems.
Yeah. And I think actually at Mindform, I think it's what we're doing is a bit of an experiment about how do we relate to it. There. I mean, it really is when one looks at a life. Oliver Burkeman comes to mind in terms of his 4,000 Weeks book, which I think is an incredible.
We did that book on Mindform. Were you there for that? Yeah,
no,
we
I
read
didn't.
it. We
I
did a
didn't
month
know
on
that.
I co-hosted it, I believe. Or did I? Or was that a different one?
Oh, really? Yeah.
No,
No,
that was a different one.
his stuff is
But yeah,
amazing, actually. And so it is about experimenting with how we relate to it.
yeah. Okay,
Because it gets really interesting. Yeah.
another question about Buddhism for you. So I mean, yeah, this is cool. It seems like you actually have a lot of knowledge around this stuff. But I'm curious. One of the integrations, I guess, of your different worlds that you're in, your different ways of understanding and solving problems, is Buddhism executive coaching, right? I mean, Buddhism really, you can utilize it in lots of ways, but it often manifests as a internal psychological quadrant really way of understanding things, right? Where it's very much what's
Mm-hmm.
what's going on with me, how am I viewing this problem, what state am I in, all of that.
Yep.
And then executive coaching, well, it definitely includes at least all the other three, right? What am I doing, what are the
Mm-hmm.
systems we're going to put into place, what's the culture, like it's everything else. And so where have you found the intersection of those things? How have you brought Buddhism into executive? How do I guess maybe the best way to ask this question is, how does Buddhism and your knowledge in Buddhism, how do you bring that to help executives or the people you're coaching to get stuff done, to enhance their work, whatever?
Yeah. I don't know specifically how I do that. I think a lot of it's got to do with, for me, it has been a set of practices. I mean, I think that there's a set of practices, as I've referred to from a meditation or mindfulness perspective, and I look at that, by the way, as training. Some people look at meditation as it's the inherent experience that brings you closer to nirvana or exiting
The cycle of life and death.
other areas. But the issue is that it is a practice that enables me to be grounded and to more approximate some degree of equanimity. So it's actually my relationship with myself that I bring to it. I don't, again, I go back to leaders that don't want to be coached. They very rarely say, I want to be coached. They want to say, help me do this. So it's about groundedness. A lot of times specifically reference equanimity. So they're looking for somebody who can help them go from one area to the other. But I think that's what leadership is about too.
Mm-hmm.
It's like where you put your identity. Are we talking about a country? Are we talking about that's a very, very hot topic right now. So where is one's identity?
So for you with Buddhism, it's really more, which I guess makes sense. Again, thinking about the quadrants where Buddhism focuses, it's
not in the north, because I have been working both in Canada and the United States and some parts of Europe, but in Western culture, it's more acceptable now. But if I said when I was 10 years into it and said, well, I've got a Buddhist-based approach to coaching and leadership consulting, they'd go, yeah, thanks. I think the door is over there. And so the issue is again, going back to are we trying to meet somebody else's definition of what reality, experience, and the universe is about? Or are we using it as a pointer for us to be in a more resourceful state presence?
Yeah, so it just allows you to bring more awareness, more resourcefulness, etc., to your work as a coach.
Yeah, because it's not about me. When I work with clients, they don't. I mean, I'm saying this to make a point, but they don't care about me.
Yeah.
They care about where I can help them. That's what our agreement and our understanding is.
Okay, so I'm curious. I guess to speak to one of the first questions I was asking around, the way all of these things come together for you. You've been, well, how long have you been, I guess, really actively interested in secular Buddhism?
Probably maybe around 20 years or so. I mean, okay, I'll share this. I don't usually share this, but at 12 years old, I did my first transcendental meditation session. And scared the daylights out of my parents, by the way. Get a white cloth and an apple and all that stuff. and that may even be, that was a long, long time ago. So and that's actually in a different tradition. But I've always been interested in how we define the world and how we identify.
Okay, so you've been doing Buddhism for a long time. You've been doing executive coaching for a long time. Yeah. I'm curious, what, over the course of that work, what's I'll start with Buddhism. What's been a really, maybe in the last 10-ish years, what's been a real shift in the way that you understand Buddhism, what it is, or what's been a real shift in your perspective on the world that Buddhism has provided, where you would really not see things the same as you did 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This may sound probably potentially too cute, but I think I'm on a more regular basis. I'm living at the center of my experience. That as opposed to out there and what's happening, and that's a practice. Yeah. It's a practice that I think that the structure, context, the incredible depth of Buddhism has helped me in that arena. But I also have friends, I also have colleagues and people that that have done some of this journey, and they really are into the theoretical. As a matter of fact, I would say that there are some people from a Buddhist perspective that see it as a religion as opposed to an integrated philosophy. Right? So
okay, so
at least that hasn't been my experience.
What does that mean? What does it mean that you're living life from the center of your experience?
Well, it means that it, I guess, again, I go to words that I think people find accessible, and that it's life as an inside job.
Right.
And then how do you connect it to the other windows?
So perhaps
that's one of the amazing helpful pointers was integral. Now, it's funny because I was in a coaching circle or a discussion circle in Integral not too long ago, and they're actually referring to, hey man, it's like we're so much into our head. How do we get away from just theory, and what do we do about it? Because if really what we're facing now are these wicked problems, then how do we use this? It goes back to the two words, so what? So what? It's like, even if I know a lot of stuff around this or that, it's like, what difference does it make in terms of what I'm doing?
I love how there really are these two conversations going on that are both true, right? And one is, I mean, I can see immense value in that for you. One way that I'll try to articulate what you're saying around being centered on your experience is like, you're more often, the landscape you're navigating is more often the landscape of where's my attention, what am I feeling, how am I breaking this down, what's my perspective, what are my assumptions, right? And that allows you to see things more clearly. That allows you to reorient in your approach, yada yada. And that's that's so important. And we should all be asking those questions a lot more. And so many problems come from not asking those questions. But then, so what, right? On the other side of that, there's this discussion, and I see it as well. Like, I see people talking like this. It seems to be maybe kind of popular at the moment, or maybe it's just in the digital space I find myself in. But people are saying, thought without action might as well not even be there. I mean, what are you even doing, right? Like, it's not about getting it right. It's not about knowing where you are. It's not about healing yourself first or whatever. Like, you take action and you see what happens, and that's how you move forward. It's act, act, act. A little bit of practice is better than a lot of talk. You just got to move, because that's being in the real world. That's getting things done. That's learning from experience and reality rather than concept. And so both of those things sound like they're saying, do less of this, do less of the other thing, and do more of this. But actually, they're both so true. They're both and both so important simultaneously.
Very, very true. Very, very true. I mean, but it does get back to, there's a preference that people have. There's sort of their comfort zone, and it's useful to go again. That I've got to think of a better metaphor perhaps than threading the needle, but it is going and realizing too that it's dynamic. That's one of the challenges. We want to come up with the right answer. We get paid for doing the right answer. And we see that in politicians. We see that in a number of different areas, and there's a certainty, there's a psychological certainty to that. But
but you're right. It's dynamic, right? Because you need both. You need to act and learn and take in information from that, and then there are moments where you need to ask yourself, okay, I've acted, I've seen what's happened. How am I interpreting that? What does that actually mean? What have been my wrong assumptions? Is this the way to be going? And then you need to move away from that and go back into action. But if you're stuck on one, right? If you have that, and I mean, what's been coming up a lot for me, but I've legit been like trying to hold back bringing this up, because I bring it up in every single episode of this podcast, is the left brain, right brain thing, the master and his emissary, right? Which is,
right.
There's the pop culture, pop psychology, I guess, understanding of left brain, right brain, which is a bit of an oversimplification, but it's, it's the approach of outcome oriented truth. These are the facts. This is the outcome. And I'm going to use these facts to get to the outcome. That's like left brain. And then there's right brain, which is much more subtle, nuanced. It's the mode of operating that allows us to understand emotions and faces. It's how we operate when we're encountering new stimuli. It's more integrative, right? And what that speaks to me is an overleaning, and I think there is a lot of that in our world today, and that's the sort of thesis of the big book on left brain, right brain by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. The thesis is there's way too much left brain. It's way too much left brain, and that's a perfect expression of the barrier of always being in an outcome oriented, this is the right answer, these are the facts kind of approach to understanding things, is that we have all of these incredible tools, like ways of understanding problems, ways of approaching problems, maps in relation to the landscape, right? They're all really cool tools that we can bring out. A map, it's in our backpack. We can try different maps. We need our topography map. We need our treasure map. We need our whatever. And they're useful for us to reach our subtle, sort of constantly evolving outcome and to adapt to our subtle and constantly evolving self and environment. But as soon as we confuse that map for the territory, as soon as we think this tool that we really should just use as a tool when relevant is the answer, is the truth, then we are so disabled. We're so impaired because there's so much that we're not seeing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's one of the challenges, in terms of all the information that we have, and all the information available to us. And some split brain research and left and right showed that people who apparently very much inhabited the left brain, and one would think that that's logic and very rational, were unable to make decisions because they didn't have access to some of the emotional and some of the more creative aspects of the brain. And so it goes back to an inside job, and it goes back to it being that which window is right. Going back to the metaphor, which window is
that was the wrong message to show. Ryan's just said in the chat, theory without practice is empty, practice without theory is blind. And I used to, there was this church I would drive past when I was living in another city, Christchurch, New Zealand, and it said, what did it say? Oh, think like a man of action and act like a man of thought. Right. I love that. Both are, it's not just one thing I've uncovered about this whole integral framework, right? Where there's a little bit of truth in every perspective and they're all valuable. I mean, it's really been the theme of this conversation. One thing I've uncovered from that as well, it's not just both are a bit true, both are useful. It's actually each of these ways of understanding, when you have that without the others, it's hollow, it's weak, it's empty, it doesn't work, right? Like the Buddhist approach of what's going on internally, your perspective creates reality, all of that actually doesn't work if you aren't able to balance it with these other ways of understanding reality. It becomes sterile. It's just so.
Otherwise, the Buddha would have just never left the.
Yeah,
Buddhist.
exactly. But what did he do? He went around. He spread the word and he sacrificed.
I think there was 4,600 talks.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, this might be a good sort of time and place to start ending the call. My question for you, just to close it off, I love asking this question. I'm curious actually to hear the answer from you. Is okay. Well, we've got this theme that's come out. It's clearly really huge for you, right? Different ways of understanding, and I it's a shame I didn't record it, but I just forgot to hit record. But the last podcast episode I did with John Webster, I don't know if you guys have chatted on the platform, but he has a really similar way of understanding. He's probably about in the same generation as you as well, and that's what he's built over the years. It's just it's subtle, it's evolving. There's no fixed answer, and it was really so. Yeah. I just really enjoyed getting that again. I'm really learning that right now. But anyway, with what you know and with what your kind of your values are and your ambitions and your understanding of what's the useful, what's the functional way to solve problems, could you think of like a fictional or maybe real character, film, TV, book, whatever, that really captures the peak of that way of approaching problems to you? Like what that represents your ideal character. It's fun for me to get a picture of that. Do any come to mind?
Yeah, boy, I don't know. Hadn't thought of that. Yeah, I'd have to think of that.
Really hard
sorry,
one.
what comes to mind is probably something that is like it would be an amalgam of a Buddhist warrior, maybe, Buddhist Stoic warrior. I'm not sure. Yeah. I think it's really, one acts, and I think there's incredible value. And one of the things that we didn't talk too much about this, but virtue from a Stoic perspective, like values are what's important to you, and that's really very important. And I think even in Western society, the Stoics tended to say virtues were actually what you demonstrated of the things that you value. It's like making them into reality of a sort. And one of the people who really popularized Stoicism right now, Ryan Holiday, wrote a book that I think is actually right on the money. It's The Obstacle is the Way. And it really it isn't about finding bliss and everything being simple. Because it isn't. Life isn't that way. It never has been. In the 300,000 years we've been around as a species, undoubtedly it hasn't been that way. And so it's a way of recognizing that we are in relationship with this universe and that there are opportunities to learn. We call them obstacles.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Great. That's a good way to close. But I just wanted to read this message on the chat here. Vin, and this is the first character that came to mind when I was asking you the question as well. Vin, who's listening live from Mindform, said Aang from Avatar. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a kid's animated show.
Yeah.
I think he's perfectly that. This whole show is the journey of, I take this approach to solving problems. Oh no, that doesn't work. I need it. And then and that's all these different very cool. But anyway, I recommend that show to all psychotechs. Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for your unique insight and wisdom. I feel like we really narrowed in on a really valuable idea there. You're right. You said it better than I could sum it up right now. So thanks for your time. Maybe we'll have you on again. And I look forward to chatting to you more on the platform, on Mindform, and all of that. And see you around.
Thank you very much. It was I really enjoyed it. I talked about things that I find that sometimes I say things and go, you know what, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. So externalizing it gives you an opportunity to generate. There's all kinds of ways in which we acquire insight viscerally to our deep and thick brains. So it's been a really exciting experience. This is my first podcast, so I'm no longer, if I could use the term, I'm no longer a podcast virgin.
Yeah.
I'm so happy about that.
Yeah. Well, I listened you into your own wisdom, clearly. That's what's to be what happened.
There you go. Yes, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Have a great evening, whatever the time is in Canada. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye now.
Thanks for listening to the Mindform Podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychotechs, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.